There are few verses in Scripture more potent with redemption and restoration than the words spoken by Joseph to his trembling brothers in Genesis 50:20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. What a declaration. A man once betrayed, beaten, sold, falsely accused, and forgotten, standing not in bitterness but in boldness, not in resentment but in redemption. Joseph looked back over the years of pain, injustice, isolation, and testing, and through the lens of divine wisdom, he saw God's fingerprints all over the broken pieces of his story. Let me ask you today, what have you been through that you thought would break you? Who betrayed you? What season wounded you? Which pit tried to swallow your purpose? Like Joseph, maybe life didn't go the way you planned. Maybe people you trusted hurt you, opportunities slipped through your fingers, and the dream God gave you seems delayed beyond recognition. But here's the truth, God still means it for good. You see, when people plot, God plans. When the enemy strikes, God strategizes. When evil rises, grace rises higher. Joseph's life reminds us that what looks like destruction is often construction. God is building something eternal with the very bricks others threw at you. Let Sets follow his journey. He had dreams, God-given dreams, but those dreams cost him. His brothers hated him, threw him in a pit, sold him into slavery, lied to their father. And what did Joseph do? He served, he obeyed, he trusted. Even in the dungeon, he kept walking in integrity. Even when forgotten, he kept trusting in God. Why? Because Joseph believed in a sovereign God, one who is not bound by injustice, not confined by betrayal, and not intimidated by evil. He knew that when we can't trace God's hand, we can trust his heart. Think about it. Joseph didn't become prime minister overnight. It took 13 years of suffering, of being misunderstood, of being mistreated. But those years weren't wasted. They were preparation. God was shaping the man who would one day save a nation. That's what God does. He takes what was meant to destroy you and transforms it to deliver others. He takes your scars and turns them into signs. He uses your setbacks as setups for something greater than you imagined. Listen carefully. No wound is wasted. No prison is permanent. No betrayal is bigger than God's plan. If Joseph had never been sold, he never would have entered Egypt. If he never entered Egypt, he never would have been in Potiphar's house. If he never entered Potiphar's house, he never would have gone to prison. If he never went to prison, he never would have met Pharaoh's cupbearer. And if he never met the cupbearer, he never would have stood before Pharaoh. And if he never stood before Pharaoh, he never would have saved his people. What others meant for evil, God meant for good. So today, whatever your past, your pain, or your present, hear this clearly. God has not abandoned you. He is working in ways you cannot see. He is orchestrating every detail, redeeming every hurt, restoring what was lost, and rewriting your story for his glory. God doesn't just allow suffering, he transforms it. He doesn't just rescue you from pain, he uses it to rescue others. He doesn't just deliver you, he develops you in the process. And when it's all said and done, you shall look back just like Joseph and say, it wasn't them, it was him. God meant it for good. Let that truth anchor you today, not just as a statement of theology, but as a testimony of triumph. Because what you're going through is not the end of your story. It sets just the setup for the day when you settle, declare, God meant it for good. No matter how carefully others scheme against us, no matter how deeply someone may try to hurt us, the plans of people can never override the sovereignty of God. What others may intend for harm through betrayal, deception, or manipulation, God has the divine ability to weave even those moments into the fabric of his greater plan. When Joseph's brothers conspired to get rid of him, they thought they were writing the final chapter of his story. They had no idea that their evil intentions would become the very vehicle God used to position Joseph for purpose. This is the mysterious beauty of divine sovereignty, that nothing escapes God's oversight and nothing can sabotage his plan for your life. Not the cruelty of people, not the delays of life, not even your past. God sits on the throne unshaken by human decisions, fully in control, and always orchestrating events to fulfill his purposes. We may not understand it in the moment, but one day we'll look back and see clearly the enemy plotted, but heaven planned, and God's plan cannot be undone. We often long for purpose without realizing that it is pain that prepares us for it. Throughout Scripture and in our own lives, we see that the path to purpose is rarely smooth. It winds through valleys of disappointment, rejection, and hardship. Joseph didn't step into his calling the day he had the dream. He stepped into it after years of being crushed, tested, and humbled. The pit, the slave quarters, and the prison were not detours. They were divine classrooms. Pain has a way of teaching us what comfort never can. It deepens our dependence on God, refines our character, and strips away pride. It softens our hearts so we can handle the weight of the calling God places on us. Without the struggle, Joseph would have lacked the strength. Without the suffering, he would have missed the sensitivity needed to lead with compassion. And so it is with us. What we see as delays and difficulties are often the very means God uses to shape us for something greater. In His hands, pain is not punishment, it's preparation. People may act with cruel intentions. They may lie about you, betray your trust, or try to block your progress, but their malice does not have the final word. Human actions, no matter how calculated or vicious, are still under the sovereignty of God. When Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery, they believed they had erased his future. Their jealousy and hatred drove them to commit unthinkable evil. But while they were plotting, God was planning. While they were tearing Joseph down, God was setting him up. The truth is, no human being, no matter how influential or malicious, can cancel the mission that God has placed on your life. The enemy may try to delay it, discourage it, or distract you from it, but he cannot destroy it. God's calling is not subject to human approval. His purposes are not dependent on favorable conditions. Joseph's rise to power wasn't because his brothers supported him, it was because God sustained him. And the same God who protected and elevated Joseph despite the hate of his own family will do the same for you. Man's malice may be loud, but God's mission is louder, and it always wins. We see moments God sees the whole story. While we're trying to make sense of what's happening in the present, God is already standing in the future, working everything together for His purpose. His vision is not limited by time, confusion, or circumstance. He sees the end from the beginning, and nothing catches Him off guard. When Joseph was thrown into the pit, God already saw the palace. When Joseph was falsely accused in Potiphar's house, God already had the key to the prison door. When Joseph sat forgotten in that dark cell, God was already preparing Pharaoh's dream. Our perspective is often clouded by what we feel right now, but God's view is eternal, clear, and complete. He is the master author, and while you may be stuck on a painful chapter, He knows how the story ends. That's why we can trust Him even when we don't understand. What feels like delay isn't denial, it's design. What looks like detour isn't defeat, it's direction. If we could see what God sees, we would rest instead of wrestle. So today, take comfort in this truth. The God who sees the end from the beginning is still writing your story, and He hasn't missed a single detail. So often we pray, we believe, and we wait, but the answer doesn't come when we expect it or in the way we hope. In those moments, it's easy to feel forgotten. It's easy to wonder if God is listening or if He's changed His mind. But here's the truth. A delayed answer is not a denied one. God doesn't operate on our timetable. He moves according to His perfect wisdom and eternal plan. When Joseph was in prison, he interpreted the dreams of two men, one of whom promised to remember him before Pharaoh. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. Still, no word, no help, no breakthrough. But while Joseph waited, God was working. What seemed like silence was actually strategy. God wasn't withholding an answer, He was preparing the right moment. Had Joseph been released too early, he may have returned to slavery. But at the appointed time, God's time, he was brought before Pharaoh, not as a prisoner, but as a man with divine insight. The delay served a purpose. It positioned him for elevation, and the same applies to you. Just because you haven't seen the outcome yet doesn't mean God has forgotten your prayers. He may be aligning people, preparing places, and shifting circumstances behind the scenes. Trust His timing. He's never late. He's just always on schedule for your good and His glory. Many of us look at our past and see nothing but mistakes, shame, missed opportunities, and pain. We assume that what we've been through disqualifies us from being used by God. But in reality, God doesn't discard our past, He redeems it. He takes every broken piece, every wrong turn, every painful experience, and weaves it into His divine purpose. Look at Joseph. His story wasn't spotless. He was a young man with pride, a favored son who didn't always use wisdom when sharing his dreams. Then came betrayal, slavery, and prison. Most people would say his story was over, but God used every single part of it, not just the victories, but the valleys. The very places of Joseph's suffering became the training ground for his assignment. The pit taught him humility. The prison taught him patience. The years of isolation taught him to depend on God alone. You see, what looks like a disqualification to man is often a qualification to God. He uses the unlikely, the overlooked, and the imperfect because it's in our weakness that His strength is made perfect. Your past doesn't push you away from God's purpose. It can actually push you toward it if you allow Him to shape it. Nothing is wasted. Not the hurt, not the failure, not the detour. In God's hands, your past becomes preparation. What you thought would disqualify you may be the very thing God uses to minister to others, to open doors, and to fulfill the calling on your life. So don't be ashamed of where you've been, because that's where God began the work He's still completing in you. Forgiveness is not just an emotional release, it's a spiritual key that unlocks favor, freedom, and fruitfulness. When Joseph stood before his brothers, the very ones who sold him into slavery, stripped him of his home, and altered the course of his life, he didn't retaliate. He didn't remind them of their guilt. He didn't seek revenge. Instead, he forgave them. He wept with them. He embraced them. That moment wasn't weakness, it was strength. It wasn't forgetting the pain. It was choosing not to let the pain define him anymore. And through that act of forgiveness, God didn't just restore a broken family, He released a greater purpose. Forgiveness is powerful because it closes the door to bitterness and opens the door to blessing. As long as you hold on to offense, you chain yourself to the past. But when you forgive, you release the offense to God and make space for His favor to flow into your life. Joseph could have stayed angry. He could have let resentment grow in his heart during those long years in the dungeon. But instead, he let God heal what others tried to destroy. And because he chose to forgive, God elevated him to a position of influence, not just to bless him, but to save others through him. If you're holding on to what someone did to you, you're not just carrying pain, you're carrying a barrier. Forgiveness isn't saying what they did was right. It's saying God's purpose is greater than their wrong. It's trusting God to be the judge while you choose to be free. And when you forgive, just like Joseph, you position yourself to walk in the fullness of what God has for you. Don't let unforgiveness rob you of your destiny. Release it and watch how God begins to move. Some of the greatest blessings in life are born out of the heaviest burdens. What feels like a weight today may one day become your greatest testimony. Joseph carried a burden that most would have crumbled under, betrayed by his own flesh and blood, sold as a slave, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. But instead of allowing those burdens to break him, he allowed them to shape him. He chose to trust that God was still at work even when the burden was too heavy to understand. And what happened? God turned the burden into a blessing. Not just for Joseph, but for an entire nation. The very path that caused Joseph the most pain became the platform for his greatest purpose. If he had never been burdened with betrayal, he never would have been in Egypt. If he had never been in Egypt, he never would have interpreted Pharaoh's dream. And if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been in the position to save millions from famine, including the very brothers who hurt him. That's how God works. He doesn't waste the weight. The burden may bend you, But it won't break you when God's hand is on your life. He uses it to deepen your compassion, sharpen your faith, and prepare you for something bigger than yourself. The things that overwhelm you today might be the very things God uses to overflow your life with blessing tomorrow. So don't despise the burden. Don't rush to escape it. Instead, ask, God, what are you trying to build in me through this? Because in His time, He will transform the very thing that felt like a curse into a testimony that blesses others. The burden isn't the end, it's the beginning of something beautiful. And when God turns it around, you'll say with confidence, what was heavy became holy, and what was painful became powerful. Obedience in the hard seasons often feels unnoticed, unrewarded, and even unnecessary, especially when it seems like everything around you is falling apart. But the truth is, those are the moments when obedience matters most. When Joseph was sold into slavery, he didn't rebel, he served. When he was wrongly accused and thrown into prison, he didn't complain. He remained faithful. He kept honoring God when no one was watching. He stayed committed to integrity when no one was rewarding it. And it was that quiet, consistent obedience in dark places that opened the door to divine favor. We often want the palace without the prison, the promotion without the process. But God uses hidden seasons to prepare us for visible assignments. Joseph didn't step into leadership overnight. He was tested in places where no one applauded him. His obedience behind the scenes was what qualified him to lead on the stage. God saw his faithfulness when he interpreted dreams for prisoners, not kings. God saw his diligence in Potiphar's house when no one else believed in him. And because Joseph honored God in private, God honored him in public. The same is true for us. Obedience in the valley sets the stage for elevation on the mountain. When you remain faithful with little, God knows He can trust you with much. That quiet yes in the dark can echo loudly into your future. So if you're in a season where obedience feels heavy, thankless, or even pointless, don't give up. Heaven is watching. God is working, and at just the right time, He will open the door that no man can shut. Obedience always precedes opportunity. Keep walking in it. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. Brokenness is not something we like to talk about. It feels like failure, like weakness, like something to hide. But in the hands of God, brokenness is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of transformation. Joseph experienced deep brokenness. He was torn from his home, stripped of his identity, isolated, falsely accused, and forgotten in prison. But it was in those very places of brokenness that God's power began to shine through him most clearly. Joseph didn't come out of his trials bitter. He came out with wisdom, compassion, and strength. That's because God doesn't waste brokenness. He uses it to make us into vessels of His power. When we are broken, our pride is shattered. Our self-reliance is stripped away. And in that place, we begin to lean not on our own understanding, but on God's strength. Brokenness reminds us that we need Him. It softens our hearts, sharpens our perspective, and creates space for God to do what only He can do. The Apostle Paul said, "When I am weak, then I am strong." Why? Because our weakness becomes the platform for God's glory. When we reach the end of ourselves, that's where God begins to do His most powerful work. For Joseph, the pit and the prison weren't just low points. They were places where God was shaping his character, pruning his heart, and preparing him for the responsibility of saving a nation. Had he skipped those seasons of brokenness, he might not have had the strength or humility to carry the weight of leadership. And so it is with us. If you're walking through a season of brokenness right now, don't curse it. Don't rush out of it. Invite God into it, because the cracks in your life may be the very places where His light shines the brightest. Your brokenness is not your disqualification. It's the evidence that God is about to reveal His power in a way you've never seen before. God never wastes a wound. Every tear you've cried, every heartbreak you've endured, every painful experience you've carried, none of it is meaningless in His hands. We may not understand why we had to go through certain things, why people hurt us, why doors closed, or why we suffered loss, but God does. And more than that, He has a purpose for every wound. Joseph's wounds were deep, emotional, mental, even spiritual. He was wounded by rejection, betrayed by his own brothers, forgotten by those he helped, and misunderstood at every turn. But each of those wounds became a part of the story God was writing. They shaped Joseph into a man who could lead with humility, forgive with sincerity, and steward power with compassion. Without the wounds, he would not have had the wisdom. Without the pain, he may not have developed the patience. God used what others meant to destroy him as tools to develop him. You may feel scarred by what life has done to you, but scars are not signs of weakness. They are signs of healing. They prove that you've been through something and survived by the grace of God. And those scars can speak louder than sermons. They can become bridges of connection and empathy for others going through their own trials. God is a master redeemer. He can take the most painful parts of your past and use them as ministry in your future. That loss, that betrayal, that disappointment, God can use it to strengthen others through your testimony. Nothing is wasted, not one wound. He collects every tear, he sees every sleepless night, and he promises to bring beauty out of ashes. So don't hide your wounds. Let God heal them, and then let him use them, because the place where you were once broken might become the place from which he brings life to someone else. Divine delays are one of the most misunderstood parts of our faith journey. We often interpret delay as denial, or silence as absence. But in reality, what feels like a delay is often a strategic pause designed by God himself. Joseph experienced this firsthand. After interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh's officials in prison, he asked the cupbearer to remember him. Joseph hoped that this would finally be his breakthrough. But days turned into weeks and weeks into years. The cupbearer forgot him. No call came. No doors opened. It seemed like yet another setback in an already painful journey. But what Joseph couldn't see was that God was orchestrating something greater. If Joseph had been released at that moment, he likely would have returned to servitude or obscurity. But when God finally moved at the exact right time, it wasn't just for Joseph's benefit, it was for the saving of a nation. Pharaoh's dream, the famine, the need for wisdom, everything had to line up perfectly for Joseph to step into his assignment. The delay wasn't random, it was divine. And the same is true in your life. That job you didn't get, that relationship that didn't work out, that opportunity that slipped through your fingers, none of it took God by surprise. He is not slow or forgetful, he's intentional. He may be protecting you from something you can't yet see, or preparing something far better than what you're asking for. Sometimes the delay is about growth. God is developing your character so you can carry what he's about to release. Other times he's aligning circumstances, positioning people, and creating conditions for his perfect will to unfold. So don't despair in the waiting. Don't give up when the clock seems to tick without answers. God's delays are not dead ends, they are divine setups. He's never in a hurry, but he's never late. And when his timing arrives, it won't just bless you, it will make sense of everything you went through to get there. There are seasons in life when everything goes dark, when the doors close, the answers stop coming, and the silence feels suffocating. In those moments, it's easy to believe that God has stepped away, that he's no longer listening or working on our behalf. But here's the comforting truth: even in the dark, God is still working. His presence is not limited to our ability to see him. His power is not diminished just because we can't feel him. In fact, some of his greatest work is done in silence, in hiddenness, and in stillness. Think about Joseph again. When he was in the pit, there was no heavenly voice. When he was marched into slavery, no angel appeared. When he was falsely accused and imprisoned, no miracle broke open the prison doors. Yet behind every quiet moment, God was orchestrating something divine. Just because Joseph couldn't see movement didn't mean there wasn't any. God was positioning him, preparing Pharaoh, aligning Egypt, and setting the stage for redemption, all without Joseph knowing. And that's how God often works. He moves quietly, steadily, intentionally behind the curtain of what we can perceive. Seeds are growing even when they're buried in the soil. Stars are still shining even when clouds hide them from view. And God's plan is still unfolding even when we sit in what feels like a dark, forgotten place. If you're in that season right now, take heart. The darkness does not mean defeat. It may be a season of hidden preparation. It may be a time when God is anchoring your faith deeper than ever before. Keep praying, keep trusting, keep obeying, because one day the light will break through, and when it does, you'll realize that the darkness was never empty. God was there all along, working in ways you couldn't imagine, preparing you for a future far greater than what you could see. Purpose doesn't die in the pit. It doesn't dissolve in the prison. It doesn't disappear in pain. The purpose God places on your life is not fragile. It's resilient, enduring, and divinely protected. Just look at Joseph. From the moment he received the dream as a young boy, God's hand was on his life. But everything that followed seemed to contradict that promise. He was thrown into a pit by his own brothers, not a stranger, not an enemy, but family. Then he was sold into slavery, falsely accused by someone he served faithfully, and locked away in prison for years. Every step seemed to take him farther from the dream, not closer. But what Joseph didn't realize in those moments, and what we often forget, is that the purpose God gives us is not erased by hardship. It's shaped by it. God allowed Joseph to go through the pit, the prison, and the pain, not to destroy him, but to develop him. The leadership Joseph walked in at Pharaoh's right hand wasn't learned in a palace, it was forged in the fire of adversity. In the pit, he learned humility. In Potiphar's house, he learned servanthood. In prison, he learned patience and discernment. Every hard place became a training ground for the promise. The process was painful, but it was essential. You might be in one of those places right now. Maybe it feels like the dream is slipping away. Maybe the pit of rejection or the prison of waiting has convinced you that your purpose is lost. But hear this, God's purpose for your life is stronger than any setback. His calling on you is not subject to circumstances. It's rooted in His eternal plan. The pain doesn't cancel the promise, it prepares you for it. You may feel hidden right now, but you're not forgotten. God is using every moment, every tear, every delay, every disappointment to bring His purpose to life in you. The greater good is often hidden until the end, sometimes long after the pain, long after the confusion, long after the season that didn't make sense. When Joseph was standing in the pit or locked away in prison, he couldn't possibly have imagined the full picture of what God was doing. He had no idea that his suffering would lead to the saving of nations. He didn't know that the betrayal of his brothers would become the very bridge to Egypt. He couldn't see that the painful puzzle pieces would eventually fit together into a masterpiece of divine purpose. But when the day came, when famine struck and his brothers stood before him, desperate and broken, everything became clear. Joseph saw it. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Suddenly the pit made sense. The prison had purpose. The delay had direction. What seemed like chaos was in fact perfect orchestration. That's how God works. He doesn't always show us the full plan at the beginning, because faith is not built on sight. But in time He reveals what was hidden. What was confusing becomes clear. What once felt like punishment is seen as preparation. And that's often how it is in our lives. We go through seasons of heartache, betrayal, loss, or waiting, and we ask, why God? We search for meaning in real time. But the answers often don't come until later, when we've walked through the valley and come out on the other side. Then we can look back and see that He was always working, that He was aligning things not just for our benefit, but for the blessing of others too. Because God's plans are never just about us. They're bigger, broader, eternal. What He does in you, He also wants to do through you for your family, your community, even generations to come. That's the greater good. And sometimes it's only visible when the story is complete. So don't lose heart if it doesn't make sense right now. Keep trusting, keep walking, keep believing. Because one day, like Joseph, you'll stand in the place God prepared for you and say with certainty, not regret, now I see it. What they meant for evil, God meant for good, and it will all be worth it. Life doesn't always go as planned. There are moments when pain blindsides us, when betrayal cuts deep, when waiting feels endless, and when God's silence feels louder than His promises. But in every season, through every pit, prison, and painful place, God is still writing a greater story. What others meant for harm, God is already reshaping for your good and His glory. Joseph's life reminds us that God never abandons His purpose, even when the process seems unbearable. He is the God who turns mourning into ministry, trials into testimonies, and setbacks into setups. So if you're walking through the dark, hold on. If you're carrying wounds, trust that healing is coming. If you're still waiting, believe that the promise is still alive, because the God who brought Joseph through the storm is the same God who walks with you today. And one day you'll look back on everything that tried to break you and say with confidence, with clarity, and with peace in your heart, God meant it for good.